Thank you for joining our second event of the First Coast Section's Professional Development Series. Today we're gathered for a discussion on Florida's Live Local Act, Florida's statewide attainable housing strategy. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Casey Dindor. I'm the chair of the APA First Coast Section, and I'm also a senior planner with England, Timms & Miller, located in Jacksonville, Florida. I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. Our guest speaker is Kody Glazer, with the Chief Legal and Policy Director for the Florida Housing Coalition. Kody has expertise in land use law, affordable housing, planning and development, and policy implementation. He provides technical and legal assistance to local governments, community-based organizations, and policymakers on inclusionary housing policies, community land trusts, fair housing, land use, environmental law, and the law generally as it relates to housing. In his role, he leads the coalition's advocacy efforts at all levels of government, including as lead of the Sadowski affiliates, and has expertise in drafting state legislation and local housing ordinances and policies. Prior to his current role, Kody clerked for the National Fair Housing Alliance on issues related to fair housing and equitable opportunity. He's an alumni from the Florida State University College of Law, where he was a member of the FSU Law Review and the Journal of Land Use and Environmental Law. Following Kody's presentation today, and time permitting, we'll open the floor to any questions that you all may have. We request that you go ahead and put those questions in the chat as Kody moves through his presentation today. For those of you that submitted questions in advance, those have been worked into Kody's presentation, and if they were not addressed during the presentation, they will be addressed first following today's presentation. With that, Kody, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Casey, and good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be with you all today, and thank you, First Coast Chapter of APA Florida, for the invitation to speak on Live Local. So for all the folks out there today, I'm sure you probably have heard the words Live Local put together in some form or fashion a lot over the past year or so. And so my goal for today's presentation is for those of you who have been doing a lot of work in Live Local, hopefully give you something new, new data points, new ideas you haven't considered yet. And for folks who are brand new to Live Local and have no idea what it is, hopefully I give you some good starting points to help you understand, what was in the act, what it does, what it doesn't do, particularly as it relates to land use planning for affordable housing. So a little about us, just real quick. Florida Housing Coalition is a statewide nonprofit. We are primarily a training and technical assistance provider. And what I really want to focus on is that last line there, which is that we're actually contracted by the state through what's called the Affordable Housing Catalyst Program. So if you are a local government right now, and you have like a Live Local application in front of you, if you have or trying to like draft your own like Live Local ordinance or policy, like we can provide assistance to you free of charge to the state's program just to make sure that Live Local is working as it should. So if you have any questions about all that, here's my smiling mug and my contact information. So for today, so I have made this presentation, the PowerPoint, much longer than I intend to present on. Because you will be having this PowerPoint as a resource, a handout for you all, for those who registered. So today I'm really what's going to focus on is just the land use and zoning portion of the Live Local Act. So Live Local covered a whole lot, but I'm really just going to focus on the land use portion today. But in this PowerPoint, you also have information for your resources on the property taxes and the funding piece of the act as well. So firstly, just introduction to Live Local, sort of what it is, where we are now, how we got here. So last year, 2023 legislative session, it soared through both chambers of the Florida legislature, signed into law by the governor last March as the Live Local Act. Arguably the biggest piece of housing legislation in Florida since like the early 1990s. It was probably the state's like first, big picture strategy of any kind aimed at addressing affordable housing problems. And so we got the Live Local Act. And so basically, ever since this act was signed into law last March, there's sort of been like a will they, won't they have some sort of glitch bill in 2024 to try to shore up some of the things that needed to be spelled out more clearly with the Live Local Act. And so this past session, we got our Live Local Act amendment bill. So in a year, we not only got the act itself, but already had an amendment to the Live Local Act through Senate Bill 328 from this past legislative session. This bill, which primarily amended the land use provisions that we're going to talk about today, was signed into law by the governor in May 16th, and most of in the Senate Bill 328 went into effect the moment that the governor signed it So SB 328 has been the law of the land for Live Local since mid-May. And so what did Live Local contain? It contained a whole lot. So it had a broad variety of funding efforts aimed at some of the state's affordable housing programs, a record amount of funding in it, upwards of $811 million for SHIP, SAIL, Hometown Heroes, which won't be the focus of the presentation today, but just know a whole lot of money was pledged towards statewide affordable housing programs. There are 3 brand new property tax incentives also created for affordable housing in the act that we will not discuss today, but you have in this PowerPoint as a resource to kind of learn what they are. There was a brand new land use preemption, which we'll talk about today. Really the state's first foray into statewide preemption on affordable housing and land use. And so that is what we'll focus on today. But first, before we get there, again, for folks who maybe your first time interacting with the Live Local Act, here's a cheat sheet for you to kind of help you understand like what all is in it. I think it's helpful to kind of organize all of what's in Live Local into these 4 buckets. So on one side, you have all the funding and property tax stuff with a bulleted list of the programs that are related to those policy areas. You have the land use tools, the mandate, the optional tool that we'll talk about. You also have certain publicly owned land policies, as well as everything else, right? So just a lot of language around, encouraging local governments to carry out certain affordable housing activities. And so the last sort of introductory point before we get into the meat of today is sort of, what the Live Local Act covered versus what it did not cover. I think, Live Local has sucked up a lot of air in the affordable housing world over the last year. I think for good reason, right? It's the most wide-ranging piece of legislation we've had in Florida in decades. But it didn't cover everything. It was a very narrowly constrained act. It covered funding, some land use tools for commercial areas. But I think that what is more important is what it did not cover, which is all the other aspects of the affordable housing toolkit that both local governments and the state has. So for example, Live Local didn't touch anything to do with zoning in residential districts. Didn't touch anything regarding, buy right multifamily allowances broadly speaking in the state. Didn't cover local funding for housing. So I think when we talk about Live Local, it's important to kind of understand that it's just one act. It was never intended to solve the state's affordable housing crisis. It provides a number of tools, but not nearly all the tools that we need to solve our housing problems. And so let's get into it. This is for the AP Florida First Coast section. The land use mandate in particular we'll dive into. What was the Live Local Act, or what is the Live Local Act's land use mandate, land use preemption, whatever you want to call it? Basically, it's the state saying that if you are an eligible affordable housing development, if you are a development where you set aside at least 40% of your units as affordable rental housing to households at or below 120% AMI, then you get some favorable entitlements. So if you are that sort of eligible development, so 40% affordable rental, 120% AMI, and you want to build that property on in any area zoned for commercial, industrial, or mixed use, then what the Live Local Act does, it provides several preemptions as to what local government cannot regulate in terms of that project. So the Live Local Act has certain use preemptions, density, height, FAR, admin approval, and some parking standards that are preempted from local government control when it comes to these eligible affordable housing developments in these magic 3 zone districts. For folks that have been working on Live Local at either as the developer side or the local government side over the past year, you will know that there are still a lot of unresolved interpretation questions about what all of this means, right? There's still an outstanding question about what it means for an area to be zoned for commercial, industrial, and mixed use, for example. So right now, sort of percolating among different local governments is this question of, does any area zoned for those uses mean literal zoning classifications? Or does it mean just your commercial district, just your industrial district? Or does it refer to simply any area that allows for those types of uses overall, right? So let's say you have an office district, for example, that's where the classification is office. Would the Live Local Act apply to that district? That's right now is sort of an unanswered, unresolved legal question. And most jurisdictions so far are taking the position that the preemption only applies to the literal zoning classifications, right? So just those commercial, industrial, mixed-use areas as stated in its zoning code or its comprehensive plan. Our opinion is that it is more broad than that it can be interpreted to apply to simply any area zoned for those uses. I understand there's no clear answer on this. There's also an informal AG opinion last July that came out for the former opinion, which is that it only applies to specific zoning classifications. So there's definitely an area that is still unresolved. Some jurisdictions, apply it to just these areas, some apply it for more, but it sort of depends on where you are in the state. So if you are one of these eligible affordable housing developments, what do you get? You get a lot of cool land use entitlements. First thing is you get favorable use. So you are allowed to build multifamily or mixed use residential in commercial, industrial, and mixed use areas without needing a zoning or land use change, right? That's the favorable use requirement allowances. You also get favorable density allowances. So basically, eligible affordable housing developments are entitled to the highest density allowed on any land in the city or county where housing is allowed. So let's say you're in a city and somewhere in the city, the zoning code allows for up to 50 units an acre. An eligible development under this tool would be allowed to build up to 50 units an acre. That's what it means there. Also some favorable height entitlements. So the developer is entitled to the highest currently allowed height for a commercial or residential structure within 1 mile of the project or 3 stories. So basically sort of as the crow flies, do 1 mile radius, highest currently allowed height in that area is what an affordable housing developer could build up to. And there's also some exceptions for projects in close proximity to areas with a lot of single family homes. Very in the weeds, so I'm not going to go through it, but there's what that exception looks like. And there's also some more favorable stuff in regards to floor area ratio. This one is new as of the 2024 session. Basically, jurisdictions cannot limit the FAR below 150% of the highest currently allowed FAR in the jurisdiction where housing is allowed. There's also some favorable parking standards. Basically, if you're within certain buffers, so if you're within half mile of a major transportation hub and the project has available parking within 600 feet, then local government has to reduce parking by 20%. And then finally, there are some favorable admin approval language as well. Basically, accepting all these things that are preempted. If a project otherwise meets all the other aspects of the comp plan and land development code, then these projects have to be administratively approved and basically cannot go before a city or county commission. So that is what you get. If you're an eligible development, you get all those entitlements to build these types of housing. There's a lot of sort of nuances to that too. So first of all, in bold at the very top is the fact that all other state and local laws still apply to these projects, right? So it might not sound like a lot right now, but except for use, density, height, admin approval, FAR parking, all the other puzzle pieces of zoning still apply to these things. And so local governments, if they want, can still regulate things like setbacks, open space, maximum surface or maximum lot coverage, things like that that aren't squarely preempted by the text. There's also some other things like different exceptions in close proximity to airports, to military. There's something called the 20% rule. So see how nuanced all this stuff is. Where if you're a city where you have less than 20% of your overall area currently designated for commercial or industrial, and you can only use this tool to approve mixed use properties and not multifamily only. So a lot of caveats, a lot of nuances that we're happy to answer further questions about. So common questions so far about the land use mandate. So this is kind of like, that was the introduction. Now we're gonna get into more of the weeds for maybe some folks who have, working live local for a good amount of time now. Here are still some of the common questions that are out there in the live local world. And really, I think one of the more pressing questions these days is the top one about whether or not this mandate applies to planned unit developments or PUDs. The majority of jurisdictions out there are saying that, so let's say you have a PUD that was approved 10, 15 years ago, and a portion of that PUD allows for commercial, industrial, or mixed uses, right? The question is, can this mandate apply within the PUD just to those commercial, industrial, and mixed use parcels? And right now, a majority of jurisdictions are saying no. They're saying, PUDs or negotiated development agreements or negotiated contracts. State law doesn't preempt those contracts already in place. And so therefore, they're not applying the Live Local Act to PUDs. There are some jurisdictions that are taking the opposite view and saying, yes, we are going to apply this preemption to PUDs. Places like Lee County, Coconut Creek, Collier, and others are kind of on the flip side. So again, depends on where you are in the state, depends on your commission, your attorney's office, and how you interpret that first bullet there. There's also some questions still out there about how to monitor affordability, right? So one of the requirements is that these properties have to be affordable for at least 30 years. Well, who is making sure that that is the case? And so that is, in a sense, an unfunded mandate on local governments to continue to monitor affordability. I have a model land use restriction agreement that we drafted to help folks kind of navigate that. That is up to the local government to do. And then also these other questions here as well. So that's sort of like how it works. Let's talk about how it has actually worked in practice, right? So one of the sort of gaps of the Live Local Act is that there is really no like statewide tracking or reporting system for how much this tool is actually being used statewide. So if I had a magic wand and I was trying to amend the act, one of the things would be, we need some sort of tracking system to know like if this is successful or not. And so what we've done here is that, internally at the Florida Housing Coalition, we're just sort of trying our best and like navigating, news articles, using AI to, look at agenda items, word of mouth, just kind of get a sense of like what is happening there because there's no, statewide mechanism. And so far in the year, a little bit over a year since the act went into law, we have found that there's around 46 planned multifamily developments at some stage of the development process that are, have already applied to use this tool or have stated their intention to use this tool. And so out of those around 46 unit developments throughout the state, that equals to around 17,000 total units that are in the pipeline that may not have been this close to development without the tool. And so if you break it down by income range, and this is where there's definitely a gap in the available data, a good portion of these units are at that 20% range, which certainly is a conversation for debate. Does this act do enough to serve folks with the lowest income? Definitely a topic of conversation, because around half are for that 120 range that we have data for, and a lot less are being used for the 80% or 60% or below AMI range. So this is just our best. It's not a perfect picture. It's just sort of, there's no tracking tools. So folks like us are just trying to navigate the best we can. For our data, it looks like there are definitely certain hotspots in the state that are seeing more Live Local projects. As you'll see here, Miami is getting a lot. So if you combine Miami and Miami-Dade County, they have 14 of those, around 46 applications in the state utilizes preemption. Also have some in Orlando, Hillsborough, Sarasota, Orange County. And then here's just a full list of all the places that we have found that either have a development that has actually applied for this thing yet, have made it their intent to apply for the land use preemption. Again, not a perfect list, but this is just kind of a sense of like it's happening throughout the state, right? It's not just one jurisdiction. This tool is sparking interest in building affordable housing on these parcels throughout the state. So what are some of the common concerns that I think can be and have been sort of being resolved? And these are some of the more common ones you'll see across the state, which is this idea of, the tool applies to commercial, industrial, and mixed use areas. And frankly, I'm an affordable housing advocate, I'm an affordable housing person, like my whole career is just affordable housing. But affordable housing should not be everywhere, right? There are some industrial areas that may not be suitable for affordable housing. And so the question has come up is like, well, with the sort of the other tools in the toolkit that local government still has to regulate these projects, right? Like buffers and setbacks, open space. How do you ensure that we're not just citing affordable housing in like food deserts, places with noxious uses, like bad places to have housing, period? There's also been a concern about, placing housing where there's not adequate infrastructure, right? You might have some, vacant, abandoned shopping centers that are converted into housing as a result of this that may not have been planned to have, large scale multifamily development on it. So how do you navigate that? Big one, number 3 here, is this concern about the loss of job land, right? When a jurisdiction, zones something commercial, there's sort of a understanding that it's going to be for some sort of job producing use. And so with this, you're kind of like limiting the amount of land that's just for like a business and opening up more land for housing. 4th one is something that I'm personally concerned about and interested in, is how Live Local may or may not reduce local sort of motivation to adopt, other affordable housing things that need to be done, right? This is a very narrow tool. It doesn't. There's so much more local governments can do. I think one thing that I want to avoid as the affordable housing world is for folks to say, "Oh, we had this live local thing. We're good on affordable housing. We don't need anything else," which is just not the case. And then there's no data system. And then finally, I think probably the biggest concern that has been raised so far, if there's no statewide planning agency tasked with enforcing any of this. So if you're a local government, you'll know this and have gotten a live local application, you'll know this well, is that all these sort of interpretation questions about what applies to what, to where, and how, there's no state agency giving any guidance on it. And so basically all these sort of conflicts and interpretation issues are being resolved between, local government attorney, developer attorney, and which to me isn't necessarily a great way to shape policy decisions, but that's just in reality what happens when you don't have a statewide enforcer. So there's some common concerns. Happy to kind of brainstorm about how to address those things. Cool. So that was what the tool does, how it works in practice. So we got a couple of questions registration about how can local governments be proactive in making sure that this thing works in practice, right? Because it's one thing to just say in state law that these developments are allowed to build in these places. It's another thing for local government staff to actually process the application, give the building permit, and see development actually happen. So here I'll provide some ideas for what local governments can do now, maybe before they've gotten an application, just to kind of prepare for getting an application. And so here is just so again, this is all very just our own internal research because again, no reporting system of the jurisdictions in the past year or so that have already been proactive, right? So all these jurisdictions here, and there may be more. If you're out there and you're not on this map, I'd love to hear from you, and we'll add you to the map of jurisdictions that have actually done a live local mandate policy or ordinance so far. And you'll see there's a lot of good examples out there of jurisdictions that come out and say, we're going to pass an ordinance. We're going to clearly define, what zone district this applies to. We're going to clearly define, what multifamily regulations to use to shape the project. So happy to provide, examples from all these. We have these different records of the ordinances. I'm happy to share what these folks are doing. So being proactive. So for those jurisdictions on that map that have done some sort of live local policy or ordinance in preparation for using the tool, what are in those policies? And really the predominant thing I mentioned a second ago is that a live local land use mandate policy could contain, again, that clear statement of which zoning districts in your city or county are in fact eligible for the tool, right? Are you a jurisdiction that's going to just look at the actual zoning classification? Are you going to allow PUDs? Are you going to allow, office or recreational zoning districts as part of this, right? That's something you can all lay out in a land use mandate policy. You can also have clear statements of the maximum densities, maximum heights, the process by which developers or applicants would get approval with the Live Local Act. Places like Orange County and Hillsborough and I believe Marion have their special sort of zoning verification forms just for Live Local. So that's certainly something that folks can do. But there's a lot of ways to be proactive and just prepare for an application in the future with this tool. So here's some examples. Not going to go through all these. You'll have these as a resource when we send out the PowerPoint. But Titusville, I think, is a fantastic example of a really complete, fleshed out ordinance for what all this could contain. So they are an example of a place that has clearly defined, again, what those mixed-use districts are, what those industrial commercial districts are. They have the process, the reporting requirements. They have the affordability conditions. They got a lot of stuff. They got buffer requirements in there, setbacks requirements, everything. So that's a really good example of a fully fleshed out policy. Excuse me. You also have St. Petersburg, who came out last year with their own policy, where they're clearly defining, the max densities, where this thing is applying. Orange County, another good example. The arrow is pointing there to show, they are basically saying, if you want to build in these zone districts with this tool, you got to use, reference these multifamily regulations for the project. So that's definitely very helpful for developers. Boca Raton, another great example. Again, they specify what zoning districts to use. They regulate more closely the non-residential component of a project. So let's say you have a mixed use Live Local product that goes in front of you. Local government does have discretion about how to regulate that non-residential component. And so that's what Boca Raton does. They regulate the square footage, regulate what kind of non-residential uses are allowed with this tool, and a lot more. So the last thing that I'll mention and turn it over for questions is sort of, we had this mandate, we had this preemption, and obviously the common question is, well, what if I really don't want affordable housing in my commercial areas? Like, what do I do? And so local governments still have a lot of levers to guide growth, in a sense, to make this land use preemption less valuable, right? So if I'm a developer, I'm trying to like find land that could be used for affordable housing, I'm probably going to go to those parcels where I have the less sort of regulations, if you will, to get in the way of me building that affordable housing property, right? So in theory, right, if a jurisdiction has very restrictive zoning in the residential areas, right? If you have restrictive zoning in other areas, but a developer can use this land use preemption to build in commercial areas, that developer is probably going to try to find commercial land because it's just simply easier for them to build affordable housing on commercial land with this tool than it would be to build their affordable housing project in a residential area. So the first thing that folks can do if they really don't want to see affordable housing built in their commercial industrial areas is simply to make your residential areas more amenable to large scale multifamily development. And so we've seen a lot of efforts in the last several years of jurisdictions on their own enacting zoning reforms to just allow more multifamily in more places. So that can be certainly a way to kind of make the preemption less valuable to developers. And so you're able to guide growth to those residential parts of your town that maybe be more suitable for affordable housing development services. You can also layer certain incentives. Something that we've explored is maybe there are some very specific commercial areas where you really do want to see some sort of mixed use affordable housing development. You can sort of impose things like overlay districts to say, hey, look, development community, if you find land in these certain areas, we'll sweeten the deal by providing things like impact fee waivers or expedited permitting or some other sort of lot design, maybe some subsidy to kind of guide growth to areas that are more suitable for affordable housing. And so one of my favorite examples of this is the city of Sarasota. And so this was last September, I want to say, where they enacted this, is they created a density bonus program in the downtown core of Sarasota that was actively designed to compete with the Live Local Act land use preemption. And so what they do is they provide a 4 times density bonus in targeted downtown districts if a development sets aside only 15% of the development as affordable housing. And they require lower levels of affordability. So it's just 15% of affordability instead of 40% that the preemption requires. They actually get the incomes down to serve people at 60% AMI. And so far, speaking with Sarasota staff, is they've had 4 developers try to utilize this density bonus tool and 0 for the Live Local Act's land use preemption. So there can be really fun and interesting and innovative ways to sort of create these competing local incentive programs with the Live Local preemption, so that if you don't want the preemption to be used, people will be less, aiming for that tool and maybe for your more local incentive strategy. Last thing that I'll mention here is compliance monitoring. The act is silent on, again, who and how to make sure these units stay affordable for 30 years. So it's kind of like a blessing and a curse, which is that, it's an unfunded mandate, but also, local governments do have broad discretion as to how to conduct compliance monitoring. So it's completely up to you. So if you're familiar with affordable housing funding programs, some of them can be very burdensome from a staff perspective in terms of how much you need to monitor for a particular affordable housing development. With this, you can design a program that both makes sure the units stay affordable and also saves as much staff time as possible. So something that we've seen happen so far is you'll have compliance monitoring plans that put the responsibility entirely on the developer to income certify eligible tenants instead of local government staff. And so basically this saves a lot of staff time, putting on someone else. The city can still, or county can still act as sort of that overseer authority to make sure things aren't fishy and things don't go bad. But that's just an idea to save staff time. You can have stern penalties for non-compliance. You can charge things like compliance monitoring fees. We can do things like probation if you find that the rents aren't actually affordable. do random spot checking. A lot of innovative things you can do. I have a sample Lura that folks can use. If you want to email me, I can send that to you. There's certainly a lot to cover there. I lied. So this is the very last thing, which is, as I mentioned before, there's a big gap, I think, in the Act in data gathering and tracking of how this thing is working in practice. And I just want to shout out Ford Pinellas, who has this fantastic Live Local Affordable Housing dashboard, where they are, kind of doing what we're trying to do on a state level, but way more hyper local, and for that reason, probably way more accurate. Which is looking at all these Live Local projects in Pinellas County, mapping where they are, showing how many units they are, showing what income ranges are being served, showing what acreage, project status, things like that. And so if you are working in different parts of the state and you're finding that there really is a need for more tracking, Fort Pinellas is a great model of an entity that's came out, been proactive, said, we want to track this, we're going to take it upon ourselves to do so. We're going to make our own dashboard. And so I just really encourage folks to check their work out because it's really fantastic. And so at this point, I'll open up for questions. Casey, if there's any questions in the chat that I haven't seen, a couple ones I mentioned first off, and these were asking registration. The first one being a really, really good question. So what we've started to see a little bit, and so the question is, it seems common that local governments will ask that a developer or landowner waive their ability to utilize Live Local if there is a rezoning to commercial, right? And so I'm aware of two jurisdictions that have done this. So St. Johns County, Pasco County, they've literally said that, applicant, if you want to rezone your parcel to commercial, you have to agree to waive your right to use Live Local in the future, right? So what the question is, so what are your thoughts on this practice? For me, I think it makes sense. I mean, I think, if a local government is trying to rezone something to commercial with the understanding that the parcel is going to be used for a commercial use, you don't want to approve that rezoning and then 2 weeks later get hoodwinked when that applicant turns around and builds affordable housing on it, right? To me, that makes a lot of sense. I think the one caveat I'd put onto that is, one of the reasons why this act was passed in the first place is because we have a lot of abandoned and underutilized like shopping centers in our state. And sometimes just because something gets zoned to a commercial use doesn't mean that the commercial use works out. Doesn't mean like the thing actually gets built in the end of the day. So I think in theory it's good. I think I would like to see maybe some flexibility on like what happens if you all goodwill and due diligence of the applicant, like if they can't get something commercial done, maybe at that point allow them to use Live Local, just so we're not having like vacant, underutilized land that could be used for better things. So that's my thought there. And with that, I guess I'll turn over to Casey to see. I'll address some of these later too, but any questions in the chat that we should be looking at?
Yeah, thank you. So there was a question that said the Live Local Act seems to be an incentive for developers to consider building affordable housing, which seems to translate to multifamily apartments being built where they previously didn't exist or weren't allowed. Since affordable housing is not intended for the middle class, how will this act benefit the missing middle housing?
Can you repeat the last part of that?
Since affordable housing is not intended for the middle class, how will this act benefit the missing middle?
Yeah, so there's, I guess so for the missing middle, so one of the things that the act does that's kind of confusing is that when it refers to missing middle, it's not referring to housing types like it usually is. Like it doesn't refer to things like a duplex or triplex. It's referring to that like 80 to 120% AMI range. And so if you look at like the Live Local Act as a whole, each different policy targets different income ranges, right? So for this land use preemption that we just talked about, that is primarily, I think, going to serve that missing middle, right? That 80 to 120% AMI range. If you look at the property tax piece of the act, that's primarily going to serve the 80 to 120% range. So those two policies together are going to get units built at those ranges. The rest of the act, the funding, particularly the funding for sale and some of the other public land efforts, other aspects of the act do serve below that, right? So they serve 60% or below, 80% or below. So I think it depends on like what aspect of the act you're looking at. I think, one of the main criticisms of the act has been like, does it do enough to serve those with the lowest incomes? Because all the data shows, and we all know that like people at the lowest income are in the most need of affordable housing. which tends to be folks below 60%, below 80% AMI. And so there's a a good policy debate that can be had about, like, does this do enough to serve those ranges, and how can local governments still use their other sort of incentive programs, their own funding efforts, to try to target even lower income ranges. So I hope I answered that question. There's a lot too. I think in some, you look at the land use preemption and the missing middle property tax exemption, they do serve the 8120 range. The other policies are a little bit different.
Regarding the requirement to build a land inventory of publicly owned property that is appropriate for affordable housing and post it to our websites, how do we define appropriate?
Love that question. So yeah, so this is an aspect of the act that did not get to, but it is very important, which is that the act, so basically since 2007, for folks who may not be familiar, there has been a state requirement that all local governments in the state produce what's called an affordable housing inventory list, and basically look at all land that's owned in fee simple by the local government and pick out the ones that are quote unquote appropriate for use as affordable housing. The challenge with that is that state law has never defined what it means for a parcel to be appropriate for use as affordable housing. And so really it is up to local government discretion as to what that means. And so what we really do recommend is that each local government have some sort of written policy that spells out for itself what appropriate for means in the context of affordable housing. So it could be things like, does it have the correct zoning? Is the lot size big enough? Is it close to jobs? Is it close to transit? Is it close to schools? Is it in a wetland? Is it not in a wetland? It's really up to local government to make that decision. We actually, through the state's Affordable Housing Catalyst program, are releasing like a full guidebook on using publicly owned land for housing that spells out more specifics on how you can structure like a local policy. But it's certainly a loaded question and a really good question to ask.
Thank you. Another question we had is, do we know how many municipalities are opting to adopt the ordinance for the local option tax exemption?
Yeah, so you go to this slide. So yeah, so there are 3 property tax exemptions from the Live Local Act. So far, so in the act, there's a new tool that local governments can pass, this local option affordable housing property tax exemption, which is number 1 on the screen there. And so far, to our knowledge, there are 3 jurisdictions, Jacksonville, St. Pete, and St. Lucie County, that have enacted this exemption. I know others have been considering it in terms of adopting it for incentivizing, these developments that serve 60% or below AMI, but those are the first 3 that have formally enacted it so far.
Looks like we have 2 more questions, and you touched on these briefly. One of them is, the Live Local requires 40% of the project to be set aside for affordable housing units. Is it true that the remaining 60% can be market rate units, and can those be used for condo or sale?
Yes. Yeah, so how it works, yeah, so if you have 40% of your overall project that's rental and affordable, you are eligible for Live Local. The other 60% can be at whatever price point, and they can be for ownership. That was actually a change that happened in SB 328 this past year, is it made a clarification language to say that, yeah, other 60% can be ownership condos as well.
The last one kind of touches on this as well, and it's the Live Local requires at least 65% of the total square footage of a mixed-use project to be residential. In a condo or rental scenario, is there a minimum percentage of the total residential square footage within the building for affordable rental units? Yeah, so the way that the act is written is, yeah, so for mixed-use Live Local projects, the minimum has to be, the square footage has to be at least 65% residential, but there's no maximum, right? So there have been some jurisdictions that have said, you need to have at least 10% non-residential. Some, I think Titusville says it has to be at least 20% non-residential. Coconut Creek is like, has to be at least 35% non-residential. So jurisdictions have discretion as to, what square footage has to be non-residential, and also what non-residential uses you are going to allow in conjunction with the residential portion. So if that helps that question. Yeah, that's great. That wraps up all of the questions. I think all the other questions that were listed in the chat were addressed pretty clearly during your presentation. So I don't know, did you have anything else to add or any closing remarks?
I mean, if folks are interested in going through the property tax stuff, I certainly can. We have some time. Do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah, probably. We did just receive one other question. I'll go ahead and give you that. Regarding compliance and enforcement, are there any recommendations on how to ensure a Live Local Act development stays affordable during its 30-year affordability period, or when its 3-year affordability period for the various tax exemptions? I know you touched on this briefly, and that's kind of up to the local government, but that you had some stuff, so here's your screen.
Yeah, it's so each compliance monitoring plan. So yeah, local governments have discretion as to how you monitor affordability for that period. And something that we recommend is, the city doesn't necessarily have to certify incomes and rents of tenants each and every year. They certainly could. You can do things like random spot checking of certain units. You could do, 1-year audits, 3-year audits. My favorite thing to discuss is like, what are some penalties for non-compliance that you can incorporate that sort of scares folks into complying, right? Like you could have like a certain, dollar amount penalty per violation that's in your, land use restriction agreement that basically like if the city finds out that the rents are actually unaffordable, you just either sue them and get the money back or something to get, performance in line. But yeah, happy to answer the question. I'm happy to meet with them one-on-one to kind of provide this model alert that we have and all the nuances of it, because it certainly is a big topic.
Thanks. And then, yeah, if you wanted to touch on the tax exemptions, we have a few minutes for that, and then we'll go ahead and close it out.
Well, yeah, so a big other portion. So there's, like I said, there's a lot of different parts of the act. There's the land use part, money, the public land portion, which someone asked a good question about. There's also these three brand new property tax exemptions. So the first one, as someone asked about, is a brand new tool that's been coined the local option. So basically, local governments now have the authority to adopt their own property tax exemption ordinance if the developments meet certain criteria. So local governments can now provide this property tax exemption to developments that are at least 50 units, where they set aside at least 20% of those units as affordable to below 60% AMI. So where this exemption targets very low income households. Of course, it sort of skews towards the larger multifamily aspect of it. But a brand new tool that local governments have, and the statute that enacted this tool has a lot of nuances for how a local government needs to formally enact this exemption. Jacksonville, St. Pete, and St. Lucie have enacted ordinances I can share with folks if you're interested. They really spell out things nicely. The second new exemption that was in the act deals with nonprofit land. So if you are a nonprofit or you work with nonprofits and they own land and then lease said land for a period of 99 years to provide affordable housing of some kind, then the land itself is exempt from property taxes. So that's what that one does. And the third one is probably the most discussed property tax exemption. It certainly has already had the most impact. And that's this missing middle property tax exemption, which basically provides pretty favorable property tax relief for developments that have more than 70 affordable units, so 71 plus affordable units to folks at or below 120% AMI. And so the exemption has different tiers of property tax exemptions. So any of the units that serve folks between 80 and 150% AMI, and a lot of numbers, those units itself get a 75% property tax exemption, and any units that serve folks below 80% get a 100% property tax exemption. And so there's sort of like this weird two-step application process that folks need to go through to get this. You first have to apply to the Florida Housing Finance Corporation, basically in the fall of every year, to get like certified for it. And then the applicant developer would take that certification then to their local county property appraiser, who then like formally gives the exemption out. And so this year, I think even next month, we're going to get our first batch of data as to how many developments formally got this first year that this exemption is in place. If you look at FHFC's website, the vast majority of units that were applied for are in that 80 to 120% range. So again, that question comes up about like, this do enough to serve lower income folks? And so one thing that came out of the 2024 legislature is a brand new opt-out provision for that 80 to 120% missing middle exemption. And so basically starting next tax year, if you are in a jurisdiction where Schimberg Center data shows that you actually have a surplus of affordable units for folks up to that 120% range, then your jurisdiction can technically opt out of that 75% property tax exemption. So again, a lot of nuances, a lot of statutory language that you can sort through. But basically how it works is based on the most recently published Schimberg report. And if you go to the very end of that report, you'll see that column I have bolded there. And basically, if that number on the far right is in the positive, then you are allowed to opt out because that number shows that you have more affordable units at that income range than people in that income range. And so if you have a negative number there, we would not be allowed to opt out of this exemption, but if a positive number, you would. I know there's been a lot of play, a lot of number of jurisdictions have already opted out of this missing middle exemption. We're trying to make a full list of those, but that's 3 exemptions in a nutshell.
And what document did you say that table's in?
This is in the Schimberg Center for Housing Studies annual report that can be found on their website. Big caveat is that the 2024 report is released in December of this year. That will be like the formal document that shows whether or not your city or county can opt out of this thing.
Okay. Great. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Really appreciate your time and joining us today. I did have a couple of announcements. This session is eligible for CM credits. The link is in the chat all the way up at the top if you want to scroll there. Otherwise, you can go through the APA website to log your CM credits for this session. It is 1 hour. Also, for those of you that are local to the First Coast section, next Wednesday on July 24th, the APA First Coast section will be hosting a planning professional social at B Pizza and Sidecar in San Marco at 5:30. And APA First Coast and WTS are jointly hosting a lunch and learn on the Emerald Trail in Jacksonville on August 28th. Our featured speaker for that one will be Kay Ehas, the CEO of Groundwork Jacksonville. For more information, please contact our local chapter board members. Contact form is available on the APA website under local sections. With that, Kody, again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you joining us today. It's insightful to hear from you directly.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.